So, welcome to the cost of making a game. This is a very sad talk because it's talking about all these things that you have to spend money on or time on or your mental energy on in order to make a game. But who am I? My name is Emre Deniz. I'm the CEO of Opaque Space. We're essentially emerging technology games and content company that's based out of Melbourne. I've previously worked as a game design lead for Opaque Media Group, which is our parent company. I've worked also as a senior material and texture artist, and also as a project manager as well. Some of the work that we do is based in serious games, other is on virtual reality games, but predominantly we do some pretty cool stuff with people in aerospace and space and stuff like that. Heckling's advised as well, because, yep, thank you. Feel free to boo or laugh at me. I normally give a lot of talks that are based on entrepreneurship or virtual reality kind of content or technology development, as well as game development, but this is the first time I'm actually talking about things that are quite personal in the sense that I'm an employer of staff members, and there's a lot of things that I have discovered in the sense of hiring people and managing them that has been quite intimidating to me. But I hope for those of you that have anywhere from single person game development outfits to 10, 30, 100 person outfits, that you take some of these lessons. They may apply to you, they may not, but they're the things that we've found and challenges that have been relevant to us. So my qualifications for this talk is that I pay people to make games, right? Pretty simple. This talk is not about how to reduce your costs in game development, because I'm not the person to be talking about that. It's not kept to be region-specific either, so it's not based purely on Australia or America or even New Zealand. That's simply because I'm not an accountant. I don't know specific tax laws. I don't know some of the loopholes. For example, in Australia, we have something called R&D tax incentives or tax credits. So when you make a game, you're actually making an emerging technology research development effort. Therefore, you get to claim anywhere from 30 to 40% of some of your expenses back. Great on paper, accounting nightmare. Right, so if we want to make a game, we're going to take the traditional formula of you make something cheap, you make something fast, or you make something good. But when we apply it to the game development and the cost of calculating games, we also want to think about making it healthy. So we want to look about, and yes, this is not a Subway endorsement, but essentially the formula here is that you're going to have to pick one or two. But with good planning and I think good preparation, you can probably pick all four. But it's important to know how these things will cost you, what they will cost you, and what their effects can be. So for many of us, me included, as a business owner, so this is how responsible I am as an adult, we kind of think that running a game studio involves salaries, equipment, and rent. You nail those three, you're the next Steve Jobs, you're good to go, right? But it's not really true, and it's not really that simple. So breaking these costs down, salaries is how much you pay your people, equipment is how much you pay companies, and rent is how much you pay people that are richer than you are. But let's dive deeper. I should have had the meme. We need to go deeper, right? Salaries also include insurance. They include tax, like payroll tax. They include benefits, and these can include severances, legal costing, your accounting costing for getting people paid on time. Unless you use Xero, then you're paying someone to fix Xero. Your holiday pay, federal taxes, state taxes, more legal costing. Now for equipment, we've got build devices, because you want to run on NVIDIA, AMD, iOS, Android. You've got a PS4 in the corner that's got fire coming out of it. Fucking Creative Cloud, you've got to pay for licenses on that. You got your license costing as well. Everything has a license cost. If you want to do something for enterprise, you're going to have to pay 10 times more for the same thing as well. And And then certification, platform submission, festival submissions, exhibition festivals, a bunch of different costs. But rent also includes in your overheads, internet, electricity, body corporate, right? We pay our body corporate for an elevator tax. We don't know where the elevator is, but it's in the building somewhere. It's a 2-floor building, but we pay, I think, something like $2,000 a year in our building, or even more, for an elevator that we don't even know exists right now. Desks and chairs, physical objects, that costs money. And because I knocked it, it depreciated. More fucking legal, right? Legal costs, visa costs, legal costs, and a bunch of other stuff. But now, these add up, right? So you think, all right, I pay people X amount of money every week, and that's great. My runway goes till next December, fantastic. And then you add all these costs onto it, and then you look back on your runway, and it's next week. So the formula for that tends to be somewhere around the region of $10,000 US dollars a month per employee, but that's the calculations in the US, and that's the reason I didn't put them up on the screen, is because they may not be relevant to New Zealand. So, the stuff that we forget when we make these calculations, because we said salaries, rent, and I forgot the other one. No, I didn't. Equipment. Marketing. We all forget marketing, or we think marketing's free. Now, if there's any marketers in the crowd, you know this all too well. We just assume that marketing just happens like a flood. Travel costs. So we think that all these people that are coming to talks, exhibiting their games, going to PAX, that it just happens somehow magically free. It doesn't. It costs a lot of money. And the more people you take on these things, so if you go from 1 developer to 3, the cost doesn't just triple, there's associated costs that come along with it as well. And audio, we always forget audio. I have forgotten audio, and I've been hit with an audio bill that has been many, many thousands of dollars. And I've sat there and said, how the hell did we pay so much money for a couple of lines of dialogue and some music? And it turns out that's the standard cost. So you need to budget those into play as well. Because marketing, for example, deep dive, we need to go deeper, is websites, promotions, bribing journalists, transport for travel. So Ubers, you think that $10, $15 kind of dollar ride to the hotel doesn't add up? You multiply that by 2, multiply it by all of your staff, things like surging, and then the entire exhibition time, trip to the airport, trip from the airport, and your transport costs can very quickly blow out. And you've got flights. Hotels. If you've ever been to GDC in San Francisco, you will pay half of your game development budget for a hotel in San Francisco per night. Random shit that happens. So, you know, someone lost their phone. The Uber driver took you to another state. That's happened. Or the engineering team rented a car and drove from Germany to Austria by accident, and now they're stuck. That's happened too. For audio, we've got sound effects, right? Separate from music. Very important distinction when you make the quote for your audio, because it turns out they're very different things, and different people make different things associated with audio. Also, music licenses. This one got me as well. Didn't realize that I have to pay more money to license my own music that I'd paid for, but it makes sense. Oh yeah, localization. Big cost on that one, and multiplies for every single language that you want to include, including, well, and keep in mind that some regions have got multiple languages, some countries have got multiple dialects of languages too. So let's look at the bonus round, basically. Who has any estimates in their head about what you think the salary of a studio with 7 staff, full-time staff, would be for salaries? Does anyone have, Yeah, total, let's go total.
A lot.
A lot's good. 100K for a month?
No, per year,
Oh.
750.
Let's go month. Don't give me heart attacks, I don't want a blue screen again. Per month, 100,000. Shit, where are you working? Okay. I'm going to come over to wherever that is. What was that? That's, yeah, good. I'm still going to work for Liam though, by the way. So what do we expect for rent?
We're talking Kiwi or?
Let's go Kiwi. Let's localize. Okay, I can bill NZGDC later. Yeah. So what are you all paying for rent at the moment? Okay, couple of grand.
7 people, couple of groups.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. And admin per month?
Couple of groups.
You work in admin. Or you deal with admin. Yes, your sanity, or a couple of thousand. And travel costs, so random travel costs. This is the one that really spikes and goes up and down. Any estimates? Someone's going to say a couple of grand, so I'll preempt that. Right, so salaries where we work right now is 24,000, rents is 1,008. That's actually doubled now because we've got a second little room studio. Admin's 8,000 because you're looking at legal, HR, accounting. Also, we put a little bit of money aside for everyone for things like severance, holiday pay, and travel is anywhere from $4,000 to $24,000 a month. So that comes to $42,000 a month that I have to kind of find or have saved up or, in the corner somewhere to get everyone working every single month of operation. So that's how I feel every single day when I see my zero account going back down. But we need to build these games in a timely fashion, right? And to do this, obviously, has a material cost in money, but it also costs hours. And when we did these calculations, when we were making the slides here, we quickly came upon the fact that there's a huge difference between being a part-time indie developer and being a full-time developer. And I'm going to put those numbers up, and for some of you it's going to be a little bit confronting because it was for me. And you're also going to see why crunch is something that gets used very liberally, but later in the presentation we're going to talk about why crunch is very, very bad as well. So you got your part-time, full-time, and your crunch time. Now, disclaimer, crunch is poo, don't do it. I'll go back just to re-emphasize that one. Crunch is something that we do at most for 2 weeks at a time. It's been almost, is Jennifer Hazel at this conference? If you speak to anyone from Checkpoint, for example, they will give you the information necessary to show that even in a medical sense, crunch has been proven to be less productive anywhere past 2 weeks, but it doesn't stop, and we're going to talk more about that later. So let's do some numbers. Hours per week for part-time. Say 8 hours a week. Who does part-time game development here? No one? We're all professional. Saf, maybe? No? Do you think that 8 hours is realistic to expect from you every single week?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Have you had any interruptions to your work schedule though?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to say hours per month is about, I said average 20 because sometimes you get sick, you go away on a vacation, you spike out a feature, but that generally adds up to about 240 hours for a part-time developer, give or take vacations, give or take family matters. You find different work, you take on more part-time work, but with a team of 7, that's 1,600 hours. Sounds good, right? With full-time, you're looking at 38. Now, 38, according to the IGDA, I'm going to get this right, 2016 survey, 38 is actually in the lowest brackets that we've heard about in terms of the working hours. But it's what we do at Opaque Space. We do 38 hours because we think that's kind of all right. Adds up to 150 hours per developer per month, right? Adds up to about 1,800 hours per developer per year. Adds up to 12,000 hours for the entire team over the entire development cycle. So it's already eclipsed what I kind of thought was a little bit of parity, like half basically of what we thought that being an indie team would be, but it's not. And crunch time, and this is where it gets a little bit scary, is looking at 72 hours. And now the same survey showed us that anywhere from 60 to over 69 hours was a large percentage of game developers that experienced their crunch, or that's the brackets of time that they had experienced in. And that adds up to 288 hours. Now, this is all adjusted for things such as, sick days, and this is adjusted for having 6 days of work a week, because that's what crunch is. Crunch is a weekend nightmare as well. Hours per year is 3,400 hours, and it adds up to 24,000 hours for a team of 7 with crunch. And we know that crunch can last anywhere from 2 weeks in a good model world to up to a year or longer for AAA games. So those are some scary numbers when you look at them, because every single feature costs you hours. Every prototyping that you do for your game development will cost you hours as well. Every travel plan or exhibition, every time you want to go to PAX, every time you want to exhibit at GCAP, every time you want to go to GDC is going to cost you hours just to plan that. A good example is our producer spent all of yesterday planning our trips to the Tokyo Game Show, whereas she could have been doing something else. Now, if she's a part-time person, that 8 hours that she spent during that day would have taken her the entire week to plan out, basically. Every vehicle that you make in a game will cost you hours. Model it, texture it, rig it, put it into the game, integrate it, code it, make sure it works. Oh no, it's broken. Everyone's screaming at you. And also every character costs hours. So those of you that are character artists will know that rigging, skinning, animating, and texturing a character are all separate things, and they all have their hour bills as well on top of them. So I'm not saying they cost money. I'm saying they cost you hours to do. And the integration of these assets to them cost hours. Testing them will cost hours. Next one, every map that you make or every level that you create in a game is going to cost you hours. Testing the level, loading the level, making sure the level actually works as intended, making sure that its technical art is on point is going to cost hours. Again, we're not putting dollar figure on these things. We're actually taking what producers do every single day, which is time estimations, and putting them on a big list and saying that every single thing that you do during a development cycle is going to cost you time. And every single meeting that you have will cost you hours. And I say hours because you can have a meeting for half an hour, but the spin up and the spin down for programmers and artists is measured in hours instead. So if a programmer has a meeting at 10:30 and they arrive to work at 9, it's almost universally agreed upon that that programmer is not going to start doing some big feature for the start of a day until it's 10:30 or past that. And to get back into the zone is going to take another hour or two. And those of you that are programmers, you may know what I'm talking about. So we try and keep meetings to a bare minimum or at times of the day where their impact to developers is going to be low. Quality, right? So make it good. I don't know what that means. I really don't know what making a good game means. And I'm not sure that anyone else really knows that either, but the magic that makes it happen. Kind of made a diagram. Looks good to me. It'll look good to you as well. You get an idea, you research the idea, you design the idea, you prototype the idea, you test the idea, you get some feedback, you've made a really great game. But that's not really true though, is it? So what ends up happening is, you've got your idea, research, design, you prototype it, you test it, you get your feedback. And the reason why I phrase this as cost is because there's a lot of peripheral things that happen to you along the way. So you may end up slipping into a design rabbit hole. Your feedback's an utter failure. Things are just going in a cycle of you're testing. Oh, there's a shiny new idea. I'm going to do that thing now. And there's no real good metric of measuring what the cost to you in terms of emotion, in money, or in hours is to make a good game. But we have ways of mitigating that. So things like, Right, so what are some terms that we always hear about good games? Because this is important to define. Quality, polished, fun, engaging. Who's been told ever to make the game fun for any type of work? Yeah? Oh yeah, that's great, yeah. Or, when someone tells you that it's an interesting game, like what about is interesting? What do you mean? What do you mean unique? What's going, stop it, please, detailed. What? More fun, okay. Pretty, all right. So quality assurance, right? We need warm, living bodies to play your games to make sure that they're fun, good, interesting, unique, but that it's good, essentially. So we get analytics, We do that with user testing, focus testing, exhibitions, off-site QA, on-site QA, milestone demos to get the money, closed alpha, open beta, hate mail. Now, these are all really familiar things for a lot of you, right? But what they actually mean in terms of your material costs is you have to pay your volunteers. You got to pay experts. You have to book travel fees, right? Service fees as well, legal fees, because who knows what can happen. Got to book your developers for overtime for things like testing. You got your platform costs as well for submission. So for off-site QA, We have to pay a platform. Costs $400 to have 10 offsite tests with videos to be recorded and sent back to us as well. You got your dumpster fires that keep happening, and you got to pay your community managers hazard pay for dealing with hate mail. So when we matched these up, we quickly realized that making a good game and defining what good is and trying to get to that line is actually a costly process. So we're going to talk about the more personal side to this as well. And this is the one that people really here, I think, it may resonate with you, for those of you that have been in games development for anywhere from independent to AAA. And for the students amongst you, some of you may have encountered this in your education, or you may have heard some stories about this. What's the health cost to making games? Right. So in the surveys, we found that 65% of developers in the 2016 surveys, I'm not sure if has 2017 been released? No. Have experienced crunch. So 65% of people have experienced a form of hurting themselves or the people around them in order to make games. 59% expect to encounter crunch during their employment. And this is a pretty wide band as well. 32% have something that's not crunch, but it's actually longer unpaid hours, and it can last anywhere to midnight or longer. It can include weekends, or it can include being always on when you're not actually at work, which is a pretty dubious one. But if you actually end up kind of mishmashing all of them together, we can say that most developers experience crunch because they expect us to make good, cheap, and fast games, but no one wants to talk about the health aspect of that. And for 28%, that's more than 1 in 4, but close enough, crunch is defined as being over 60 hours of work per week. That's not only illegal, but it has very long-lasting and defining effects that are quite harmful to developers. And most of the developers, according to the survey and the information that we have, from anywhere from independent self-reporting to AAA internal surveys, is that most developers will engage in crunch. And these have very serious costs. So some of these costs are quite long-term. They can include things like actual brain damage. They can include substance abuse, or they can include the collapse of relationships. Memory loss. So what we've also seen, and Checkpoint is much more qualified as an organization to be able to speak about this. So if you ever do get the chance, talking to someone like Jennifer Hazel or someone from the Checkpoint organization will do you good. But memory loss, so your short-term memory loss collapses. And there's some great developers in AAA who have talked about their personal experiences in where they have no ability to account for anywhere from 3 to 6 months of their development cycle because information is just not being recorded. Physical weight gain or weight loss. Now, some of the more harrowing tales that we've heard is AAA developers, going down to levels that are actually medically problematic, or gaining a lot of weight, or being unable to actually find time to exercise. Now, this is a symptom of crunch culture because you have people in your workforce who become unhealthy by trying to essentially build a product that you can in order to make a sustainable studio. Right, so that's the bottom line of it, basically. Developing sleep problems and mood disorders. Now, this is a really serious one as well that happens. So that's a cost of building a game, in that your developers will come to work and they'll be unable to have sleep, or the problems will haunt them past, their clock off time. And cognitive decline, so the cruise control or going on autopilot. Now, these do have effects that into production, and that's the way we kind of measure this idea that crunch past 2 weeks is less productive, and increasingly less productive as crunch goes on, because people will make errors and they'll have issues and problems and whatnot. So these things will result in a loss of productivity. So that's a cost, I guess, to your game development. They will create legal liability. EA paid millions of dollars in settlement costs because their crunch culture was revealed by the partners of their developers. And other companies, those that are publicized and those that are settled behind closed doors, often will pay a lot of money in order to, I guess, repair the damage that they've done. And these pose legal liabilities for you. And if your developers acquire a lot of leave, or they acquire a lot of vacation days or sick days, and these pose HR liabilities as well. Developers on crunch or developers who are not in a healthy environment are going to take more sick days. They're going to take more time off. For some of you, especially those of you working independently and working on your own projects, on your own schedules, you may find that if you look back with hindsight and 2020 vision, when your health declined, you are not very productive and you're sitting in front of your computer, unable to kind of commit to the next asset, unable to add the new feature. You couldn't figure out why your code was working. And imagine that in an environment where it's multiplied, where everyone around you is going through the same thing, and the people that you go for support are already burnt out as well. The higher error rate during crunch or during an unhealthy work environment actually has a material cost, because as we saw before, if you want to make a good game, a lot of QA goes into it, a lot of making sure things work, that things are presentable, and the material cost around these is actually quite pronounced in that if you have a high health cost, you're going to have a very high material cost as well, because code will have to get rewritten. Someone will force push something on Git. There'll be mistakes that are made. And these are things that I think are quite evident. Now, back in, and this is anecdotal, back in, I think 4 years ago, in the first GDC that I went to, before, I guess, reporting of social media GDC conferences was something that was quite saturated. The developers from a franchise like Electronic Arts talked about how they accidentally built 2 different animation systems that were incompatible with each other during the production cycle because the teams were just rushing to kind of push out features through the door. And that is defined as an error rate because that impacted the entire franchise and its DLC after that. So I'm not sure who plays Battlefield here, but there was a shield DLC, and you couldn't climb stairs with a shield, and you couldn't duck with the shield either, or you couldn't go prone. That was not a game design decision. That was because the game had severe errors internally during the production cycle because we had multiple kind of people working on it apparently, or to their self-reporting anyway. And a collapse of culture. Now, this is a really big one as well. So what happens during these high stress points and when your health cost is very high is that people will be mean to each other. They'll say racist and sexist or xenophobic things to each other. They'll end up treating each other in ways that are quite spiteful or jaded. They'll see enemies where there are none, and that will transfer itself to the way that the work is produced. And that's really, really bad, basically. So for me, and this is where it gets a little bit more personal, so I want to illustrate something for you. And it's going to sound like the whole badge of honor thing of how much work we did or how much we burnt out in order to get to where we were. But I want to illustrate, first, let's do that little exercise and then break it down and reflect onto how it cost the company and the work that we make and why it was a stupid decision to do. So over the last 24 months, I've spent 5 months overseas in terms of promoting our company, engaging with publishers, engaging with partners, and going from exhibition to exhibition. I've kind of built up about 120 hours of paid leave, which is, according to our accountants, a complete legal nightmare for them to deal with. I've had 3 times micro burnouts, so those are things where everything collapses, I can't do work for a little bit. I was twice prescribed sleeping medication. 20 months I dealt with insomnia, which is pretty shitty. 20 months with trying to stay on and off from alcohol, fighting with depression most of the time, struggling with vigilance and hypervigilance, and lost a lot of my recreation time. This is a sign of a bad game developer, and I'm going to tell you why. So in that time, my home life collapsed. I forgot to re-register my car. I forgot to, update my license, and that's not what an adult does, basically. So I lost the ability to drive just because I was overseas or I was too busy with emails. For our legal and HR people, it was seen as a very irresponsible thing for me to have gone off and basically built up all this leave. And it wasn't the company asking me to do that. It was just me appearing to myself as being driven, where it was actually being very irresponsible. I would drop out randomly during communication with team members, or I would just stop showing up to work and call in sick for a week. And that caused a lot of issues with our production cycles. I kept ignoring the doctor because I thought I knew better, which is a pretty stupid thing to do. I became really forgetful. So people would tell me things and I would forget. People would send me emails, I wouldn't know that they were there, or I'd forget communication a lot. So I became a weak point in the way that the team communicated. Now, the reason why I kind of bring that one up is because it's important to realize that the effects of crunch and burnout are very insidious. So you don't know that you're being forgetful until you kind of relax a little bit and look back and realize that this whole romanticized burnout culture was actually detrimental, less productive, and completely, negative to the people that you work around. I stopped having focus. So the biggest issue that I was facing was I'd come to work, look at the screen, and that's it, like crickets for about an hour or longer. It could be half a day. And then once a tipping point reaches where you kind of go, oh, well, most of the day's gone, I'll do better tomorrow. And then you realize that you've spent a week doing that. Came quite spiteful and jaded towards some of my colleagues. And that meant that people didn't like interacting with me. I don't like interacting with my colleagues as well. And I treated friends like enemies. So there were people around me who were trying to give support or who needed support, and I saw them as enemies, or I kind of saw them as adversaries or people who were trying to take things away from what we were building. And that's the effects of the high health cost that there is. And I lost a lot of confidence in myself during the production cycle. None of these things are things that should be celebrated. And none of these are things that should be looked at as a template of how you make a healthy game. So as we're reaching, I guess, the half an hour kind of point, I wanted to actually have some parting kind of statements or things before we kind of move into a form of QA. Crunch in its fundamental form is you asking people to hurt themselves in order to make a product. Like when you look at it in an objective sense, if you ask the same thing of a factory worker, or if you ask the same thing of someone who goes and does admin accounting for a legal firm, it's considered abusive and it's considered illegal. So we need to move away from trying to romanticize a culture of the health cost and realize that we're asking people to commit self-harm in order to make a commercial entity. Now, you can frame it as art, you can frame it as entertainment, or you can say that creativity comes from suffering, but all of those are irrelevant when you start paying people and asking them to do things that will harm them, their families, and their friends, and that will make them worse at what they're trying to do. Can't see that, okay. Getting everyone in front of the game costs money. It costs you time. Going to expos, going to conferences, going to QA nights or open play nights, all of these have a material cost, and they're not immediately visible to you. It's only when the bills start coming in, when the Uber receipts start coming in, when you start realizing that you've had to pay people for 2 or 3 hours when they've gone after work to a nightly meetup to show off the game, or when you've taken a shift off from your part-time job in order to do some sort of showing of your game, that you realize that even getting people to help you determine what is good will cost you money. This one's actually an interesting one. You can make games fast, you can make them slow, but you have to make the game in order to finish the game. And this has a very severe cost to it that increases over time, but it can be managed as well. And I only put this because it's one of those kind of meme, hang in there, kitty kind of things, because if you don't finish the game, then your game, you've made 0% games. And that can be defined as being fast or slow. There are some independent games that have been in the work for 10 years. There are some in early access. There are some that have no finish date ever. Dwarf Fortress is a great example of this game will never be finished. But for commercial games, you're gonna have to burn. So I know one developer who anecdotally talked about his studio and how he had 1 to 2 years of runway because of great early access sales. And the problem that he was facing was that he can finish his game, but he doesn't know if to actually invest more money into finishing it quicker, or to weather it out, but then be really afraid about what can happen in terms of competitive releases or falling behind the curve. Now, what you spend on salaries does not translate into what you invest into people either. So there is a material cost of paying people so they can pay their rent. But then there's also what you pay in order to make better culture. And that can include not crunching, not relying on the higher human labor output and crushing your developers because you pay them money. that's actually a form of human investment. If people come to your work at 9 a.m. and they leave at 5 p.m. or something comparable, and they have healthy lives built around your workplace, that's a human investment that you make, and it comes at a cost. But it's a cost that's good. So salary and, I guess, looking at Excel spreadsheets and trying to squeeze hours out of people, that's not something that is conducive of making a healthy game. You can make it cheap, you can make it fast, you can make it good, but you need to also make it healthy as well. Which I guess is the main message of this talk, is that the cost of making a game can be money, can be hours, it can also be emotional labor, but we need to not just pick one, we need to try and pick four where we can as well. I don't know if this works. Yep, and I ran pretty quick under time, so we can have some QA if anyone likes, and you can also tweet at me or send me emails for further questions as well. Thank you. Anyone? Yep.
One of the problems that I've experienced, particularly working at larger publishers, is that there is a culture of grizzled veteran managers
Right.
who have been through crunch culture, have survived, have come out the other side, have usually had kids, and therefore they have managed themselves to a position where they are relatively normal compared with some of the team.
Yeah.
But the juniors who come in are mindful of crunch culture and enforce upon themselves huge working hours in order to earn their spurs.
Mm-hmm.
My question would be, how do you make sure that people who are juniors coming into a team who are desperate to prove their skills and to prove their commitment, how do you prevent them from burning themselves out?
So this is touching on a really good point, and a lot of educational facilities are guilty of propagating this myth that in the industry you're expected to do crunch. Crunch doesn't mean you're a good developer. Crunch just means that you're good at doing a repetitive task for a very long amount of time and trying to do output, make it somewhat good. The first thing is removing survivorship bias, I think. Like, for every veteran that made it, there's another 10 that got shot down, and they're living in depression, they've moved industries, their family lives have collapsed. So trying to reinforce a culture of survivorship is something that is, well, mathematically stupid, but it's also ignoring the problem, because they may have made it, but they're not going to be frank about their material costs. There's a social capital investment that happens with them, in that the grizzled veteran's not going to wake up one day and say, "No, I was wrong, got it all wrong. Turns out that things were pretty bad," because they've made a culture around that myth. So there's a problem with that. And the other one is, if you have someone that can come to work at 9 and then they leave by 5 or 6, and they know that they have to walk out the door at 5 or 6, you're going to start developing cultures of better scheduling, better self-reporting, better reporting up, and better management as well. So managers have to be good at talking to the people and saying, how long do you think this will take? What can we work? How can we work around this? As opposed to kind of saying, hey everyone, so next deadline's in a week. You're all staying here. I'll just buy you some free pizza and some Red Bull. That is being phased out, thankfully. And my advice is that you would much quicker hire someone that can do their work within the hours that is normal to a healthy employee than you would to someone who turned around and said, I can come to work for 12 hours for 5 to 10 weeks to get the job done. Because one of them is very capable of self-management, and the other one is very, very capable of self-abuse. So that's my kind of answer to that. I hope I answered your question. Yeah, okay. Hi.
So thanks for, I really enjoyed what you just talked about. I'm not in the game industry, I'm more of a gamer.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to my question actually, because I don't see myself as demanding the release schedules that require this crunch. So where is this coming from? / is there a way that the gamer themselves can be mobilized to turn around and start saying to the industry, actually, those embedded behaviors drive worse products for me and burn out the industry that I enjoy and that I benefit from, and I don't want to see it anymore. Could that be something that could help me?
I think so. I think the consumer is a critical part of how culture in the commercialization of a product changes. And we've seen it work with boycotting, for example, but for good reasons. You know, like if you go to the supermarket and you've got cage eggs and it's a plain old box, and the box next to it says, you know, we've got free range and it's organic, and the chickens run around for a bit, and then they somehow jump into, you know, to giving their eggs out. We've taught people that ethical choices in consumption are things that reflect on them, and we have not done that with games. Games is the only form, I think, of media consumption where we criticize developers for releasing something 1 week later. So you'll have the forums saying, work harder, you know, you guys are crap, why aren't you working that as hard? Why'd you delay my game for a week? It's the idea of entitlement of ownership on media. Like if a movie is, John Wick was delayed in Australia for months, right? But I don't really think that anyone kind of tweeted at Keanu Reeves saying, you're crap, you know, what's wrong with you? But this type of culture has to stop. The consumers and the gamers, they don't own the media. Like, that's as much as saying that you own Toyota because you drive a Camry. I think that once we start getting over that hurdle and we start treating it as, you know, you can criticize Toyota for making cars that spew out a crapload of fumes into the atmosphere, but you need to be at the same level to be able to criticize, you know, a AAA company for crunching their developers. I mean, if we've had companies that are paying millions of dollars in settlements to their developers, those are the people that make the experiences that help define your recreation time, that make you happy, that give you escape, or that give you joy in your life. But we don't tend to see the developers behind the product, we only see the product. We need to change the culture from getting our fix to helping fix the culture with the developers as well, I think. Hi.
Just to sort of follow on with that, do you think that has a lot to do with how we brand ourselves as game developers? Because I think a lot of people tend to sort of brand themselves as studios, create a brand that is very corporate in nature that kind of suggests some kind of headline group.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like I think it might be. Do you think it would be more helpful if we start to brand ourselves as people working on products rather than sort of flipping it around?
I think so. The two really great things that happened with this whole indie rise was that we started humanizing developers. It stopped, and the problem was we had rockstar AAA developers prior, you know, got your CarMax and things like that, but they never really went out to talk about how they were encountering the health costs or the human costs of their development cycles. With indies, we're having more people have a platform and talk about their experiences, and I think just recently, Callum Underwood did a really good talk about removing the stigma of mental health in game development and the effects around that as well. I think branding ourselves as more human entities is great, but having corporate standards of how we treat our employees needs to be important as well. Because this whole thing about, we're an indie studio, yay, we all kind of chip in and we do overtime together and we live together, that's great until a point. Because there's a point in which you pay taxes like a company and that you're held to employment laws like a corporation. So having that balance is important and not using one to cover the other. Like, you know, the big AAAs, they will use their huge corporate structure to shuffle things around. But then the indie studios will also use their kind of, oh, we're a little team kind of thing to then not pay people holiday leave or sick leave or not take severance into account as well, I think.
So we need to grow, basically.
Yes, yes. Hi.
In the same vein, we've seen a big controversial thing just recently with a Pullman article, I think, coming out of a guy describing his experience with crunch being positive. And I've seen this in media, I know.
Yeah.
I've seen it many times in my friends who work with AAA, because sometimes, depending on the company, obviously, crunch time and crunch culture is not only romanticized but also like elevated. So,
Yep.
you know, you're in this together and you're brothers in arms and you sit through crunch together and in the end you made something awesome. And you can, like some companies frame it that way to get people through crunch time. And I think that's super dangerous, and I just wanted to ask what you think about it.
Yeah, crunch is bullshit. Like as I said in the slides there, like me crunching wasn't me being awesome as a game developer. It wasn't like some noble pursuit in dedicating myself to my work. It was being an obstacle and being a shitty teammate and you know, just making my workplace more toxic. It's romanticizing crunch is like, you know, being an arsonist and setting a car on fire and being proud about it. Like, you need to seek mechanisms of support and curb that behavior. It does not do anyone benefit. Just because games have been successful by essentially, you know, crunching their employees to death prior, it does not mean that that's how you build a game. This is whole survivorship bias. Like, you can't look at a game that has been built on crunch and say that's a successful game model. That's one that worked, basically. Because if anyone's worked at AAA or an EA or anything like that, you'll know that for every one game that's published, there's 4 or 5 that were cancelled, even after 2 or 3 years of development. I think romanticizing crunch is immature, it's abusive, and it's one that has absolutely no place in the future of the games industry. Crunch is for when you need to hurt people to respond to a situation in order to meet a deadline to push a product into commercialization. So it should be used sparingly, as opposed to being something that we kind of celebrate because it shows great development capability. All right. Yeah, we're good? All right, I'm so sorry. Tweet at me or find me outside or something. I have to kind of run off to something else, but I'll be around. Sorry about that. Yeah.